The story begins in a quiet suburban neighborhood in 2022, nestled just outside of Seattle. The type of place where every lawn looks perfectly manicured, and neighbors exchange polite smiles but rarely dig into each other's lives. This is where our protagonist, Ethan Harris, and his wife, Claire, live in a charming two-story house with their 10-year-old son, Liam. Now, Ethan, by all accounts, is the kind of guy everyone admires. He's a hard worker, a project manager at a tech firm, and he's always prided himself on being the provider for his family. Ethan has a knack for fixing things, whether it's the leaky kitchen sink or the science project Liam forgot about until the night before. He's the guy who keeps everything running smoothly, even if it means sacrificing a little bit of himself in the process. Claire, on the other hand, is a strikingly beautiful woman with an artistic soul. She works part-time as a graphic designer, often balancing her creative pursuits with the demands of being a mother and wife. Where Ethan is structured and methodical, Claire is spontaneous and free-spirited, a dynamic that has always defined their relationship. From the outside, they seem like the perfect couple, partners who complement each other's strengths and weaknesses. But lately, things have felt off. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when Ethan started feeling the cracks. Maybe it was when Claire began spending more time at her new fitness studio, or when she started coming home later than usual, claiming she was grabbing coffee with friends. At first, Ethan dismissed it. Claire had always been social, and after a couple of years spent cooped up during the pandemic, he figured she was just enjoying her independence again. One rainy Thursday evening, Ethan arrived home after a grueling day at work. He expected the familiar chaos of Liam's video games blaring from the living room and the comforting smell of Claire's cooking. Instead, he found the house eerily quiet. Liam was at his friend's house for a sleepover, and Claire was nowhere to be seen. Her car wasn't in the driveway, but she hadn't mentioned going anywhere. Ethan texted her, "Hey, where are you? Everything okay?" Minutes passed, then an hour, and still no response. By the time Claire finally walked through the door, it was nearly 10 p.m., and she looked different. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair slightly disheveled, and there was a faint smell of expensive cologne that wasn't Ethan's. "Sorry, I lost track of time," Claire said quickly, brushing past him. "Rachel and I were catching up after yoga." Ethan nodded, though something about her tone didn't sit right with him. It wasn't accusatory. He wasn't that kind of husband, but the seed of doubt had been planted. A few days later, Ethan mentioned the late-night hangout to Rachel during a neighborhood barbecue. Rachel's blank expression said it all. She clearly had no idea what he was talking about. "Oh, yeah. Claire mentioned something about that," Rachel said after a long pause, quickly changing the subject. Ethan's stomach twisted. He didn't press further, but the interaction lingered in his mind. Why would Claire lie about something so trivial? That night, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling as Claire slept beside him. He thought about their marriage, about how things had changed over the years. When they were newlyweds, Claire would curl up next to him every night, her head resting on his chest as they whispered about their dreams for the future. Now there was a distance between them, a wall he couldn't quite break through. Maybe it was work, or the stress of raising a child, or the natural ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. That's what Ethan told himself as he drifted into a restless sleep. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The following weekend, Claire was more distant than usual. She spent most of her time glued to her phone, laughing at something Ethan wasn't privy to. Whenever he asked what was so funny, she'd give a vague answer, "Just a meme," or "Something Rachel sent me," before quickly locking the screen. Ethan's unease grew. He tried to brush it off, telling himself he was overthinking things, but his gut refused to let it go. On Monday morning, as Claire left for the gym, Ethan decided to trust his instincts. After she drove away, he walked into the garage and opened her car door. He wasn't proud of himself. Snooping wasn't his style, but he needed answers. That's when he found it. A small receipt tucked into the passenger side door pocket. It was from a coffee shop downtown, dated the previous Thursday, the night Claire had supposedly been with Rachel. And there was a name written in the guest section of the receipt. Ryan. Ethan's mind raced as he stared at the slip of paper. Ryan. Who was Ryan? He didn't recognize the name, and Claire had never mentioned anyone by that name before. Was it a friend? A coworker? Or something else? He placed the receipt back where he found it, careful not to leave any evidence of his discovery. For now, he needed more information. Accusing Claire outright wouldn't solve anything. It would only create a bigger rift between them. Instead, Ethan decided to play the long game. He'd observe, gather evidence, and only confront her if he was absolutely sure. Over the next few weeks, Ethan became hyper-aware of Claire's behavior. He noticed how she suddenly seemed to care more about her appearance. New clothes, more time spent on her hair and makeup. She also started leaving her phone face down on the table, a habit she never had before. One evening, as Claire was in the shower, Ethan's curiosity got the better of him. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, and for a moment he debated whether to look. He felt a pang of guilt even considering it, but the thought of Ryan's name on that receipt was like a thorn in his side. Finally, he picked up the phone. The screen was locked, but the notification preview told him everything he needed to know. Ryan. Can't stop thinking about last night. Ethan's heart sank. The following morning, Ethan woke up feeling like the ground had shifted beneath him. The preview of Ryan's message had been brief, but it confirmed his worst fears. Someone named Ryan was on Claire's mind, and based on the message, it wasn't just friendly chit-chat. Ethan didn't confront her right away. Instead, he went through the motions of their daily routine. Over breakfast, Claire seemed cheerful, almost oblivious to the storm brewing inside him. She made small talk about Liam's upcoming soccer game and mentioned plans to grab lunch with a coworker. Ethan nodded along, playing his part, but every word felt like a lie. By the time Claire left for work, Ethan was spiraling. His thoughts raced between anger, betrayal, and a desperate need for answers. He wanted to believe there was some innocent explanation, but the evidence was mounting against her. That afternoon, Ethan decided to call his best friend, Mark. Mark was the kind of guy who always told it like it was, even when the truth stung. They'd been friends since college, and if anyone could help Ethan make sense of the situation, it was him. Man, I don't even know where to start, Ethan said, pacing his home office as he recounted everything. The late nights, the receipt, and finally, the text message. Mark let out a low whistle. That's rough, dude. Are you sure it's, what it looks like? I don't want to jump to conclusions, Ethan replied, running a hand through his hair. But how do I ignore this? The message wasn't exactly subtle. Mark paused, his voice steady. Okay, here's what I think. Don't blow up yet. If you confront her without solid proof, she might deny everything and make you feel crazy. You need to get the full picture first. Ethan sighed, knowing Mark was right. How, though? What am I supposed to do? Hire a private investigator or something? Honestly, Mark said, that's not a bad idea. It's better than driving yourself insane over what-ifs. And if there's nothing going on, at least you'll know for sure. The suggestion felt drastic, but the more Ethan thought about it, the more it made sense. He couldn't keep living in limbo, questioning everything Claire said or did. If he wanted the truth, he'd have to take action. Later that evening, after Claire and Liam had gone to bed, Ethan stayed up researching private investigators. He felt a pang of guilt as he scrolled through websites, but the need for clarity outweighed his reservations. After a while, he came across a highly rated investigator named Sarah Reyes. Her website was professional, and the testimonials were glowing. The next morning, Ethan called her office. Sarah's voice was calm and professional as she asked a few preliminary questions. Do you suspect your wife is having an affair? She asked bluntly. Ethan hesitated before replying, I don't want to think that, but yes, there are things that don't add up. All right, Sarah said. I'll need as much information as you can provide. Her routine, places she frequents, any potential suspects. We'll start with surveillance and go from there. Ethan felt a strange mix of relief and dread as they scheduled a meeting. He wasn't sure what Sarah would uncover, but he knew there was no turning back. Over the next week, Ethan worked with Sarah to piece together Claire's schedule. He provided details about her gym sessions, her lunch outings, and the nights she claimed to be meeting friends. Sarah assured him that her team would handle everything discreetly, and for the first time in days, Ethan felt like he wasn't facing this alone. Meanwhile, at home, Ethan did his best to maintain a facade of normalcy. He helped Liam with his homework, joined Claire for dinner, and even laughed at her jokes. But beneath the surface, he was unraveling. Every time her phone buzzed or she left the room to take a call, he couldn't help but wonder if it was Ryan on the other end. A few days later, Sarah called with an update. "We've been following your wife, and there's something you need to know," she said, her tone careful. Ethan's heart raced. "What is it?" "She met with a man yesterday at a cafe downtown. Based on the description you gave me, I believe it's the same Ryan mentioned on the receipt you found. They seemed close." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Did they do anything incriminating?" "Not yet," Sarah replied. "They talked for about an hour, then left separately. But their body language was intimate. Laughing, leaning in, touching hands. We'll continue monitoring." Ethan thanked her and hung up, his emotions swinging between anger and sadness. He wanted to believe this could all be explained, but the image of Claire sitting across from Ryan, laughing and touching his hand, burned in his mind. That evening, Ethan decided to dig deeper on his own. While Claire was in the shower, he unlocked her laptop, which she often left open on the kitchen counter. He hated snooping, but he needed to know. As he searched through her email, he found nothing suspicious at first. But then he stumbled upon a folder labeled Drafts. Inside were several unsent messages, and one of them stopped him cold. Subject: "I don't know what to do." Body: "Ryan, I can't keep lying to Ethan. He's a good man and he doesn't deserve this. But I can't stop thinking about you. Every time we're together, I feel alive in a way I haven't in years. What do we do?" Ethan stared at the screen, his stomach churning. This wasn't just a casual flirtation. Claire had crossed a line that threatened to destroy everything they'd built together. The next morning, Ethan met with Sarah to review her findings. She handed him a folder filled with photos. Claire and Ryan at the cafe, walking through the park, standing too close for comfort. "This confirms what you suspected," Sarah said gently. "The choice of how to proceed is yours." Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. "I need to confront her. She owes me the truth." That evening, Ethan waited for Claire to come home. He sat in the living room, the folder of photos resting on the coffee table in front of him. When Claire walked through the door, her smile faltered at the sight of him sitting there, stone-faced. "What's going on?" she asked, setting down her bag. Ethan gestured to the photos. "Why don't you tell me?" Claire's eyes widened as she flipped through the pictures. Her face went pale, and she stammered, "Ethan, I can explain." "Can you?" Ethan asked, his voice calm but cold. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been lying to me for weeks, maybe months." "Who is Ryan?" "Claire." She sank into the chair across from him, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. "It started as a friendship, but things got complicated." Ethan's heart ached at her words. "Complicated? Claire, we have a family, a life. How could you do this?" "I don't know," she sobbed. "I felt lost, like something was missing. And Ryan, he made me feel seen." Ethan stood, his fists clenched at his sides. "I've been here, Claire. I've been here for you, for Liam, for everything. And this is how you repay me." As Claire broke down in tears, Ethan felt a surge of anger and sadness. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. Their marriage would never be the same. Stay tuned for the next part of this story, and don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel for more stories like this. Ethan stood frozen in the living room, Claire's tear-streaked face staring back at him. Her confession lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. "I didn't mean to hurt you," Claire whispered, her voice breaking. I got lost in something I couldn't control." Ethan shook his head, his fists clenched at his sides. "Couldn't control?" Claire, we've been together for over a decade. We built this life together. How do you just lose control of that? Her sobs filled the room, but they did little to soften the anger simmering inside him. For weeks, he'd questioned his instincts, second-guessed every suspicion, and now the truth was staring him in the face. Over the next few days, the house felt like a battlefield. Conversations were tense, silence even more so. Ethan couldn't bring himself to sleep in their bed, opting for the couch instead. Claire, desperate to fix what she had broken, hovered around him, trying to explain her actions, but Ethan wasn't ready to listen. "You don't get to fix this on your terms," he snapped one evening as she tried to sit beside him. "You destroyed our trust, Claire. You don't get to decide how or when I process that. I just want to make things right," she pleaded, her eyes red from crying. "Right?" Ethan laughed bitterly. "How do you make this right? How do you undo this?" Meanwhile, Ethan kept in touch with Sarah, his private investigator. He wanted to know if Claire had truly ended things with Ryan or if she was just playing damage control. Sarah's updates were a mix of relief and frustration. Claire hadn't met with Ryan again, but their message history suggested they were still in contact. "She's trying to pull back," Sarah explained during a phone call. "But he's persistent. He's reaching out to her almost daily." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. What is she saying? Mostly avoiding him. Short responses, no plans to meet. But she hasn't told him it's over completely. Ethan felt a fresh wave of anger. Claire had promised to cut ties with Ryan, but her hesitation told him she wasn't fully committed to repairing their marriage. One night, Ethan decided it was time to confront Claire about the messages. She was in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine, when he placed his phone on the counter in front of her. "Care to explain these?" he asked, his voice cold. Claire's face paled as she read the screen. The messages were undeniable proof that Ryan was still a part of her life, no matter how much she tried to downplay it. "I didn't want to upset you," she said quietly, setting the phone down. "Upset me?" Ethan's voice rose. "Claire, lying to me again is what upsets me. How am I supposed to believe anything you say when you're still talking to him?" "I didn't know how to end it," she admitted, tears spilling over. "He doesn't understand. He keeps pushing, and I didn't want to make things worse." Ethan's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Worse? Worse than what, Claire? You already blew up our marriage. What else is there to lose?" The tension reached a breaking point when Ethan decided to take Liam to his soccer game alone that weekend. Claire offered to come along, but Ethan shook his head. "No, I need some space, and Liam doesn't need to feel this tension right now." Claire looked heartbroken as she watched them leave, but Ethan couldn't bring himself to feel sympathy. He needed distance to think, to figure out what the next step should be. At the game, Ethan sat on the sidelines, clapping and cheering as Liam scored a goal. For a brief moment, he felt a sense of normalcy. But the sight of the other families, parents laughing and talking together, was a stark reminder of what he had lost. That evening, Ethan received a call from Sarah. "I've got something you need to see," she said, her tone serious. Ethan met her at her office, where she laid out a series of new photos and transcripts. His heart sank as he realized Ryan had reached out to Claire in person. "He showed up at her office," Sarah explained. "They talked in the parking lot for about 20 minutes. She didn't seem happy to see him, but she also didn't tell him to leave." Ethan stared at the photos, his mind racing. Claire had insisted she was done with Ryan, but her actions told a different story. "Thanks, Sarah," he said, his voice tight. "I'll handle it from here." When Ethan got home, he found Claire in the living room, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as he entered, her expression wary. "We need to talk," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Claire nodded, setting her phone aside. "Okay." Ethan sat across from her, pulling out the photos Sarah had given him. "Explain this." Her eyes widened as she looked at the images. "He came to my office," she said quickly. "I didn't invite him, Ethan. I told him he shouldn't have come." "But you didn't tell him to leave," Ethan shot back. "You didn't shut it down." "I tried. Not hard enough." Ethan's voice cracked with emotion. Every time I think we're making progress, you prove me wrong. How am I supposed to believe anything you say when you keep lying to me? Claire broke down, her sobs echoing through the room. I don't know what to do, Ethan. I'm trying, but I don't know how to fix this. Ethan stood, his hands shaking. Maybe you can't. The days that followed were a blur of tension and avoidance. Ethan threw himself into work, staying late to avoid coming home. Claire tried to reconnect, cooking his favorite meals and suggesting family outings. But Ethan couldn't bring himself to pretend everything was fine. One evening, after Liam had gone to bed, Ethan found himself scrolling through his phone, staring at an unsent text to Mark. I think it's over. I don't know if I can do this anymore. He hesitated before deleting the message. Part of him wanted to fight for his family, but another part wondered if it was a battle he had already lost. As the weeks wore on, Ethan realized he couldn't keep living in limbo. He scheduled a meeting with a divorce attorney, not to file papers just yet, but to understand his options. I need to know what this would look like, he told the attorney. For me, for my son, for everything. The attorney was thorough, outlining custody arrangements, asset division, and the potential emotional toll of a divorce. Ethan left the office with a heavy heart, but also with a sense of clarity. When he got home, Claire was waiting for him in the living room. Where were you? She asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. Ethan met her gaze, his expression resolute. I met with a divorce attorney. Claire's face crumpled. Ethan, no. Please don't do this. I'll do anything to fix this. Just tell me what to do. Ethan shook his head, his voice steady. It's not about what you do, Claire. It's about what you've already done. And I don't know if I can ever come back from that. As Claire sobbed, Ethan felt a pang of sadness, but also a sense of resolve. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't keep living in the shadow of her betrayal. Stay tuned for the next part of this story. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more emotional recaps and gripping stories. Ethan sat in his car, staring at the glowing office building in front of him. It was almost 10 p.m., long past the time Claire usually left work. Yet here he was, parked across the street, unable to shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. His mind replayed Sarah's last update. Claire had stopped responding to Ryan's messages a week ago, but her routines had shifted in subtle ways. Later work hours, vague explanations. He leaned back in his seat, tension coiling in his chest. What was he even doing here? Spying on his wife like some amateur detective? But deep down, he knew he wasn't just being paranoid. Something still felt unfinished, like a puzzle missing its final piece. Just as he was about to drive away, the building's front door swung open. Claire stepped out, her coat wrapped tightly around her. A man followed close behind, Ryan. Ethan's heart pounded as he watched the two of them walk to the parking lot. Their conversation animated but their body language tense. Ryan reached out to touch Claire's arm, but she pulled back, shaking her head. Whatever they were discussing, it wasn't friendly. Ethan grabbed his phone and started recording, his hands trembling slightly. He didn't need more proof of her betrayal, but he wanted to know what was really going on. The confrontation unfolded with a raw intensity Ethan hadn't expected. Claire's voice carried through the quiet parking lot as she raised her hands in exasperation. I told you, it's over, Ryan, she said, her tone firm but laced with frustration. You need to stop showing up like this. Ryan stepped closer, his voice too low for Ethan to hear. Whatever he said made Claire stiffen, her expression shifting from anger to something more vulnerable. Ethan felt a surge of conflicting emotions, relief that she was trying to end things, and rage that she had let it go this far in the first place. He wanted to storm over there, to demand answers, but he forced himself to stay in the car. This wasn't the time for confrontation. The next morning, Ethan confronted Claire at home. She was making breakfast, the clinking of plates and the smell of coffee filling the kitchen. Late night at the office? Ethan asked casually, leaning against the doorway. Claire froze for a moment before turning to face him, her smile forced. Yeah, there was a last-minute project. Why? Ethan crossed his arms, his gaze piercing. I was outside your office last night, Claire. I saw you with Ryan. Her face drained of color, the spatula clattering to the counter. Ethan, it's not what you think. Don't, he interrupted, his voice low but firm. Don't insult my intelligence. I know you've been trying to end things, but you let him get this close. You let him into our lives, Claire. That's on you. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stepped closer, her voice shaking. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I swear. I've been trying to fix it to fix us. Ethan shook his head, his jaw tight. Fix us? You're still lying, Claire. How do you fix something when you can't even be honest? For the next few days, the tension in the house was unbearable. Ethan barely spoke to Claire, throwing himself into work and spending as much time as possible with Liam. But no matter how much he tried to distract himself, the weight of the situation pressed down on him like a storm cloud. Claire, on the other hand, seemed desperate to prove herself. She sent Ethan long text messages during the day, explaining her thoughts and feelings in excruciating detail. She planned family dinners, tried to engage him in conversations, but nothing seemed to break through the wall he had built around himself. One evening, she left a handwritten letter on his pillow. Ethan stared at it for hours before finally opening it. Ethan, I know I've broken your trust, and I don't know if I can ever earn it back. But I love you, and I love our family. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right. If that means letting you go so you can find peace, I'll do it. But I hope you'll give me a chance to fight for us. The words were sincere, heartfelt, but Ethan didn't know if they were enough. The tipping point came when Sarah called Ethan with an urgent update. We have a problem, she said, her voice tense. What now? Ethan asked, pinching the bridge of his nose. Ryan's been digging into your personal life. I found out he hired someone to look into your finances and your work history. Ethan's blood ran cold. What the hell is he trying to do? Leverage, maybe, Sarah replied. He knows Claire's pulling away, and he might be trying to use this to manipulate her, or you. Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. Thanks for the heads up. I'll handle it. That evening, Ethan sat Claire down in the living room. We need to talk, he began, his tone serious. Claire nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Ryan isn't just a mistake you made. He's a threat to our family now. He's digging into my life, trying to find dirt on me. Do you understand how serious this is? Claire's eyes widened in shock. What? Why would he do that? Because he's losing control over you, and he's desperate, Ethan said, his voice rising. This isn't just about us anymore, Claire. It's about protecting our son and our future. Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. I'll talk to him. I'll make him stop. No, Ethan cut her off. You're done talking to him. If you have any contact with him again, I'll have no choice but to take legal action. Claire sobbed, her shoulders shaking. I'm so sorry, Ethan. I didn't know it would get this bad. Ethan's voice softened slightly, though his resolve remained firm. It's not just about being sorry, Claire. It's about taking responsibility for what you've done and proving that you're willing to fight for this family. The next day, Ethan contacted his attorney to discuss restraining orders and legal protections. He wasn't taking any chances, not with Ryan trying to interfere in his life. Meanwhile, Claire wrote Ryan a final email, cutting all ties and making it clear that any further contact would result in legal action. She showed the email to Ethan before sending it, her hands trembling as she hit send. I'm done, she said quietly, looking up at him. I swear, Ethan, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. We'll see. As the week unfolded, the tension began to ease, but the scars of betrayal remained. Ethan watched Claire closely, searching for any signs of dishonesty. But for the first time in months, she seemed genuine in her efforts to rebuild their trust. Still, Ethan couldn't ignore the nagging doubt that lingered in the back of his mind. Could he ever truly forgive her? Or was this just a temporary ceasefire in a battle that had already been lost? Stay tuned for the final resolution in the next chapter. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more gripping stories like this. Ethan sat at the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the floor. It was the quietest moment he'd had all week, but his mind was anything but still. Ryan was officially out of the picture, or so Claire claimed, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to come. When people like Ryan lost control, they didn't just walk away. He heard soft footsteps behind him. Claire entered the room, her face pale but determined. She'd been walking on eggshells around him, doing her best to keep the peace. But tonight, there was a tension in her expression, like she had something on her mind. "Ethan," she began hesitantly, sitting down across from him. "There's something I need to tell you." His stomach clenched. After everything they'd been through, he wasn't sure he could handle another revelation. "What is it?" he asked, his voice steady but cold. She looked away, wringing her hands. "It's about Ryan. Before everything, before you found out, I told him things about us. About you. I didn't think it would matter at the time, but now." Ethan's heart sank. "What kind of things?" Claire hesitated, and that hesitation was answer enough. Ethan stood, running a hand through his hair. "You've got to be kidding me. You gave him ammunition against me. Claire, after everything I've done to hold this family together." "I didn't mean for it to be like this," she said quickly, her voice rising in desperation. "At the time, I thought I was just venting. I didn't know he'd use it against you." Ethan turned to her, his anger barely contained. "This isn't just about you venting. This is about trust, Claire. You handed him a weapon, and now he's using it to threaten our lives." Claire stood too, tears streaming down her face. "I know I screwed up, Ethan. I've been trying to fix it." "Fix it?" Ethan cut her off, his voice like ice. "You can't undo this, Claire. You've jeopardized everything I've worked for. Our son's future. My career. Do you even realize what you've done?" The conversation ended abruptly, with Claire retreating to the guest room. Ethan sat alone in the darkened living room, the weight of her confession pressing down on him. He didn't know what was worse, the betrayal itself or the consequences he knew were coming. He reached for his phone and texted Sarah. "Ethan, need an update on Ryan. Anything new?" "Sarah, he's quiet. Too quiet. I'm keeping an eye on him. Be careful, Ethan." Ethan sighed, tossing his phone onto the coffee table. Quiet was never a good sign. The next day, Ethan received an email that made his blood run cold. It was from Ryan. Subject: "Let's talk. Ethan, you're a smart guy, so I'll cut to the chase. I know things about you that you don't want getting out, things Claire told me. But I'm not unreasonable. Let's meet and figure out how to resolve this like adults. Ryan." Ethan clenched his fists, his pulse pounding in his ears. The audacity of this man, to think he could blackmail him after everything he'd done. He forwarded the email to Sarah with a simple note: "Find out where he is." Later that evening, Sarah called with an update. "Ryan's staying at a hotel downtown," she said. "Room 815. You need to be careful, Ethan. This guy's playing dirty." Ethan nodded, though she couldn't see him. "Thanks, Sarah. I'll handle it." Ethan arrived at the hotel under the cover of darkness, his heart racing as he stepped into the elevator. This wasn't the kind of man he wanted to be, the kind who handled problems with confrontation, but Ryan had left him no choice. When the elevator doors opened, Ethan walked down the quiet hallway, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. He stopped in front of room 815 and knocked firmly. The door opened a crack, and Ryan's smirk greeted him. "Ethan, I was wondering when you'd show up." Ethan pushed the door open further, stepping inside without an invitation. Ryan backed up slightly, but his arrogance didn't waver. "We need to talk," Ethan said, his voice low and controlled. "Talk," Ryan said, leaning against the desk. "Sure. Let's talk about how Claire and I—" Ethan raised a hand, cutting him off. "You don't get to say her name," he growled. "Whatever you think you're doing, it ends here. You don't contact her. You don't contact me. And you sure as hell don't try to blackmail me." Ryan's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered. "You think you can just intimidate me? I have enough dirt on you to—" "Go ahead," Ethan interrupted, stepping closer. "Expose me. Try to ruin me. but I guarantee you won't come out of this unscathed. You're playing a dangerous game, Ryan, and you're out of your league." Ryan hesitated, his confidence cracking. For the first time, Ethan saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "You've already lost, Ryan," Ethan continued. "Claire doesn't want you. She never did. And now she's done with you for good. So go ahead. Keep pushing. But I promise you, it won't end well." The silence in the room was deafening. Ryan glared at Ethan, but he didn't say another word. Ethan turned and walked out, leaving the door ajar behind him. His hands trembled as he stepped into the elevator, but a sense of victory coursed through him. He had faced the storm, and for the first time in weeks, he felt like he was back in control. When Ethan returned home, Claire was waiting in the living room. She looked up as he entered, her eyes red and puffy. "Where were you?" she asked softly. Ethan hesitated before answering. "Taking care of things." Claire nodded, her expression heavy with guilt. "I know I don't deserve another chance, Ethan, but I'll keep fighting for us. For our family." Ethan sighed, sitting down across from her. "It's not about what you deserve, Claire. It's about whether we can rebuild what we had. And right now, I don't know if that's possible." Her tears started anew, but she didn't argue. Instead, she simply said, "I'll prove it to you, no matter how long it takes." The storm wasn't over yet, but Ethan felt a small sliver of hope. He had confronted the man who tried to destroy his family, and now it was time to decide whether the pieces were worth putting back together. The tension in Ethan's home was almost suffocating. Claire moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding him unless absolutely necessary. Despite her promises to rebuild their life together, the weight of her actions hung heavy over everything. Ethan, on the other hand, was trying to stay focused for his son, Liam, but the cracks in their marriage were too wide to ignore. It had been 3 days since Ethan confronted Ryan at the hotel. Since then, Ryan had been eerily silent. No emails, no calls, no petty threats. The quietness only made Ethan more suspicious. He'd been checking in with Sarah regularly, but even she admitted that Ryan had gone off the radar. "He's planning something," Sarah warned during their latest phone call. "Men like him don't just disappear. Be careful." Ethan didn't need the reminder. He had already started making contingency plans, ensuring that Liam would be safe no matter what happened. That night, as Ethan was settling into bed, his phone buzzed with a new email. His breath caught when he saw the subject line, "Your move." His heart pounded as he opened it. The message was short but pointed. "Ethan, I hope you're ready. By tomorrow, everyone will know the truth. You can thank Claire for that. Ryan." Ethan clenched his jaw, his vision blurring with anger. He had expected retaliation, but this? He immediately forwarded the email to Sarah with a single line. "What do we do?" Her response came within minutes. "We need to stop him. I'll find out what he's planning." Ethan sat back, his fists clenching and unclenching. He was done playing defense. It was time to end this once and for all. The next morning, Ethan dropped Liam off at school, making sure his son was oblivious to the chaos brewing in the background. Then he met Sarah at a small cafe near her office. She looked tense, a stark contrast to her usual calm demeanor. "I've got good news and bad news," she said as Ethan sat down. "Start with the bad," Ethan said, his voice clipped. Sarah sighed. "Ryan's reached out to a journalist. He's threatening to go public with everything he knows, including the details Claire told him about your company. If this gets out, it could ruin your reputation and possibly your career." Ethan's stomach dropped, but he kept his composure. "And the good news? I've managed to intercept some of the evidence he sent over," Sarah said with a grim smile. "It's not everything, but it's enough to buy us some time. If we act fast, we might be able to stop him before he causes too much damage." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. "How do we stop him?" Sarah leaned in, lowering her voice. "He's meeting the journalist at a private location this afternoon. If we intercept him there, we might be able to convince him to back down, or at least delay him long enough to get ahead of the story." "Convince him?" Ethan said, his tone dark. "You mean confront him?" Sarah didn't flinch. Exactly. But you have to keep your cool, Ethan. If you lose control, it'll play right into his hands. Hours later, Ethan found himself parked outside an upscale restaurant on the edge of the city. Sarah had tracked Ryan to a private room inside, where he was scheduled to meet the journalist. Ethan stepped out of the car, his heart pounding. Every instinct told him this was a bad idea, but he couldn't sit by and let Ryan destroy what was left of his life. As he entered the restaurant, he spotted Ryan through the glass doors of the private room. The man was laughing, gesturing animatedly as he spoke to a well-dressed journalist seated across from him. Ethan pushed the door open, his presence immediately silencing the conversation. Ryan looked up, his smirk fading as he registered Ethan's expression. Well, Ryan drawled, leaning back in his chair. If it isn't the man of the hour, come to join the party. Ethan ignored him, turning to the journalist instead. Whatever he's told you, it's a lie, he said, his voice firm. Ryan is trying to manipulate you into ruining my life. Don't let him drag you into this. The journalist raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. And why should I believe you? Ethan took a step closer, his gaze locked on Ryan. Because Ryan doesn't care about the truth. He's only doing this to spite me. Ask him how he got his information. Ask him what his motives are. I guarantee you, it's not about justice. It's about revenge. Ryan chuckled, but there was an edge of nervousness in his laugh. Ethan, you're embarrassing yourself. Why don't you leave before you make things worse? Ethan didn't budge. Go ahead, Ryan. Tell her the truth. Tell her how you manipulated my wife, how you blackmailed her, how you're trying to ruin me because you couldn't get what you wanted. The journalist glanced between them, her interest clearly piqued. Is that true, Mr. Taylor? Ryan's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered. Of course not. This is just Ethan trying to deflect. He knows I have evidence. Evidence that you fabricated. Ethan interrupted, his voice rising. You're a liar, Ryan. And if you think you can keep getting away with this, you're dead wrong. The tension in the room was palpable. The journalist stood, clearly uneasy. I think I've heard enough for now, she said, gathering her things. I'll need to verify everything before moving forward. Ryan tried to protest, but she was already walking out the door. Ethan exhaled, relief washing over him as the immediate threat dissipated. But Ryan wasn't done. As soon as the journalist was gone, he rounded on Ethan. You think you've won? This isn't over, Ethan. I'll find another way to. You're done, Ryan, Ethan said coldly. If you come near me or my family again, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. This ends now. Ryan glared at him, his jaw tightening, but he didn't respond. Instead, he grabbed his coat and stormed out, leaving Ethan alone in the private room. Ethan stepped outside, the weight of the confrontation still heavy on his shoulders. Sarah was waiting for him by the car, her expression a mix of relief and concern. How did it go? She asked. It's over, Ethan said, his voice steady. For now, at least. Sarah nodded. You did the right thing, Ethan. He's a coward. He won't come back after this. Ethan wasn't so sure, but for the first time in weeks he felt a glimmer of hope. He had faced the storm head-on, and while the battle wasn't completely over, he was ready for whatever came next. Ethan sat alone in his living room, the early morning sunlight filtering through the blinds. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards, a stark contrast to the chaos that had defined his life in recent weeks. His mind wandered back to the confrontation with Ryan. While it hadn't been the definitive end he'd hoped for, it was enough to send a clear message. Ethan wasn't someone to be underestimated. Claire was staying with her sister now, giving them both the space they desperately needed. Liam had adjusted surprisingly well to the changes, and Ethan found solace in their bond. Despite everything, Ethan was determined to give his son a sense of stability. The first steps toward healing were slow but steady. Ethan began therapy, a decision he initially resisted but quickly realized was vital. The sessions gave him a space to process his emotions, understand the choices he'd made, and learn how to rebuild trust, both in himself and in others. Claire also sought counseling separately at first and eventually suggested they attend a few sessions together. Ethan agreed, not because he believed their marriage could be salvaged, but because he wanted to understand what had gone wrong. If they were going to co-parent effectively, they needed to find a way to communicate without resentment overshadowing every conversation. During one particularly raw session, Claire broke down. "I didn't mean to destroy us," she said, her voice trembling. "I just felt so lost. And Ryan, he made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. But I see now that it wasn't real. None of it was." Ethan nodded, his expression softening. "I wish you'd come to me first, Claire. I wish we'd faced those feelings together instead of tearing each other apart." Their counselor intervened gently. "What matters now is how you move forward. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, Ethan. And Claire, you'll need to show through your actions, not just your words, that you're committed to rebuilding trust. For Liam, if nothing else." It wasn't easy, but Ethan found that forgiveness, while difficult, was also freeing. Months passed, and life began to stabilize. Ethan's career flourished as he poured his energy into new projects. Sarah's unwavering support through the ordeal strengthened their friendship, and they often joked about their shared war stories from dealing with Ryan. Speaking of Ryan, he faded into the background. The journalist he tried to manipulate never published the story, likely deterred by Ethan's direct confrontation. Rumors swirled that Ryan had left the city altogether, a move that suited Ethan just fine. Claire moved into a small apartment nearby, maintaining her commitment to being an active part of Liam's life. Their interactions became civil, even cordial, as they focused on co-parenting. Liam, blissfully unaware of the depth of his parents' struggles, thrived. One evening, after dropping Liam off at Claire's, Ethan found himself standing on the bridge overlooking the city skyline. The view was breathtaking, the lights twinkling like stars against the dark expanse of the river. Sarah joined him, a coffee in hand, her expression warm and reassuring. "You've come a long way," she said, breaking the comfortable silence. Ethan smiled. "I couldn't have done it without you." They stood there for a while, reflecting on the journey. Sarah turned to him, her gaze steady. "You know, Ethan, you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. Not everyone would have handled this with as much grace as you did." Ethan chuckled softly. "Grace, huh? I don't know if that's the word I'd use, but I'm trying. And that's all that matters," Sarah said, nudging him playfully. The real turning point for Ethan came during one of Liam's soccer games. As he watched his son score a goal and run toward him with pure joy, Ethan realized that the weight of his past no longer defined him. Yes, it had shaped him, but it didn't control him. After the game, as he and Liam walked back to the car, Liam looked up at him with wide eyes. "Dad, are you happy?" The question caught Ethan off guard, but he smiled and ruffled Liam's hair. "I am, buddy. And you know why?" "Why?" Liam asked, grinning. "Because I have you," Ethan said simply. In the months that followed, Ethan started dating again, not to fill a void, but because he was ready to open himself up to new possibilities. He met someone who shared his values, someone who understood the importance of trust and communication. They took things slow, building a foundation rooted in honesty. Claire, too, found her own path. While they would never be what they once were, she and Ethan developed a mutual respect that allowed them to support each other as co-parents. As the one-year mark of the ordeal approached, Ethan decided to host a small gathering at his home, a celebration of resilience, new beginnings, and the people who had supported him. Sarah was there, of course, along with a few close friends and family. Liam ran around with his cousins, laughter echoing through the house. Ethan looked around, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. When the night wound down and the guests began to leave, Sarah pulled him aside. "You've built something beautiful here, Ethan," she said. "Thanks," he replied, his voice full of emotion. "I couldn't have done it without all of you." Closing scene. Ethan sat on the porch after everyone had left, the cool night air wrapping around him like a comforting blanket. He sipped his drink, staring up at the stars. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. He picked up his phone and opened a new note. "To anyone going through heartbreak, betrayal, or loss. You're stronger than you think. Trust me, I've been there. The pain doesn't last forever. And when you're ready, you'll find a way to start over. Keep going. And that's the story of Ethan's journey. From heartbreak to healing. From betrayal to renewal. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.